Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a recap of the Kings and Kaisers tournament, the mini tournament that we had over this past weekend, January 10th and 11th, which was Friday and Saturday deal. And I have to say, I think it was a major success even for how small it was. I think it was a major success, and it seemed like everybody had a really good time. Congratulations to the gold, silver, and bronze winners. They were hard-fought games. I think there were some kinks that presented themselves in this tournament, which we knew were inevitable, and some really great things, some great moments, some surprising victories too. And I'll go through all of those details. The good, bad, and the ugly. So overall, we had 4 tables, so 8 teams, in day 1. We did a random draw video, and the first name we drew would be the Central Powers, and the next name we draw would be their opponent playing the Allied Powers, the Entente. And that's sort of how day 1 went. And the way this tournament worked, since it was only a 2-day tournament, is we couldn't have a traditional, BBR tournament style, which is 3 days, where you play the first 2 days and it determines which medal round game you can play for, essentially, on day 3. And that would determine who your gold, silver, bronze, or iron winners would be. For this tournament, it was going to be a cumulative score. So based on your day 1 score, that would determine who you play day 2. Day 2, it was the top 2 teams would play each other, then the 3rd and 4th teams, and then down the line, basically. 4th and 5th, 7th and 8th. I probably missed a number. Jeez. I'm tired. So on day 2, you would get a higher winning bonus for the higher the seeded game you play. So for the number 1 and number 2 seed playing each other, you would get a 4-point winning bonus for that game if you won that game, and a 2-point losing bonus, because you get a little extra in points because you're playing theoretically a harder game. And then those bonuses would get smaller the lower down in the seeded match as you went. So yeah, I thought the format worked really well. It seemed like everybody liked the format as well. And so if you had played the same team, or sorry, if you played the same side on day 1 that you were assigned to play on day 2, or sorry, let me start over. I need more sleep, more coffee. Day 1, let's say you played the Central Powers, and then day 2, you're assigned to play someone who also played the Central Powers on day 1. Between the two of you, whoever had the most points on day 1 gets to decide which side you are going to play. And we did have a situation like that, actually, for the highest seeded match. If you, however, your opponent played a different side than you did on day 1, you would automatically flip which side you'd play. So we had that as sort of like a fair system. There were only 2 teams that had to play the same side twice. So one team had to play Allies both days, and then one person had to play Central Powers both days. So that's sort of how it worked. It's an imperfect system, but I thought it sort of worked for our restriction on a 2-day tournament. And you may be asking, okay, what was the split between victories? You get 4 games on day 1, 4 games on day 2. There's 8 games. What was the split? It was quite lopsided. It was 7 Central Power victories to 1 Allied victory, and the 1 Allied victory was mine on day 2. So there's a number of reasons that could be. The game, I think a game like Kings and Kaisers is Central Power favored if you are new to the game and you do not know how to play the Allies as well yet. I would say that. The Allies are very nuanced, deceptively nuanced, and you can't play them the way you do in normal Axis and Allies games. You have to be more aggressive with them because both sides are fighting for victory points. This isn't like a BBR game where you're just trying to stop the Axis from getting a certain level of victory points. And you can't just back up, and build up and just wait for America to come in to save the day. America isn't as strong in World War I. They don't have as much punch. They're really more there as a support. So you have to play defensively a little bit at times, but you also have to strike at opportune moments. And I think players, having not played this game as much as some other Axis and Allies games, don't know when those moments are yet. And that's what I think it is. And I personally think that as you get to know the game more, I think it's more Allied favored, honestly. And if you go back to the original 1914, the basic rules of 1914 from which this game derives from, that is heavily Allied favored. So I think as players get more experience with this game, you're going to see that split really even out, or perhaps even tip in the Allied favor. Personally, that's what I think. So yeah, so day one results, let's go over those. I got them right here on my computer, which you can't see, it's off the screen. We had Dustin and Bandit. Bandit is largely new to the game. Dustin is not new to the game. Playing against Apple Corps. So they played against Apple Corps on day one. They were the Central Powers. Apple Corps were the Allies. And they defeated Apple Corps 10-6. So for the day one scores, there was no win or loss bonuses. It was just whatever victory points you ended with, that's what your score was. It's a really simple system, and it works great, and it prevents these giant disparities in scores that we sometimes see in BBR tournaments, where one team has like 44 points and the other one has like 1 point or -2 points, or it's just kind of crazy. So that score was 10-6. I had myself playing solo as the Central Powers versus Hoofbite, who was supposed to have KooKaMunga on his team as well. KooKaMunga couldn't make it the first day, so it was a 1v1 battle. Hoofbite was the Allies, and that final score was a 12-4 victory. So I defeated Hoofbite that game 12-4. The next one was CJ, another solo team, CJ Hammertime, playing the Central Powers versus arguably the top-seeded team that everyone figured was going to win the gold here, Krautfather and MooseCow. MooseCow being my partner in developing this game, Kings and Kaisers. And CJ pulled out an upset victory of 10-7. So he won by 3 points, and he was the first person ever in this game in Kings and Kaisers to take Paris. And not only did he take Paris, he took all of France and booted the American forces from the continent, which was awesomely impressive to see. I wasn't able to watch the game as closely because I had my game going on too, but our tables were next to each other and I was peeking over here and here, and it was just an amazing game to see. He upset the top-seeded team. Congratulations to CJ. That alone should give him accolades in the Kings of Kaisers community and give him some respect. So that was a big upset. And then our last game was the Prussian Grenadiers as the Central Powers versus the Rust Belt Brigade guys. So that's Big Jim and PsychoSchmuck. And that was our tightest game of day one, with a 1-point victory for the Prussian Grenadiers at 7-6. So then that led us to day two. Day two, the way the matchups worked, the top-seeded game was going to be myself and CJ, and I had the higher amount of points. We both had played the Central Powers on day one, and I decided to play as the Allies. So we had that game for the top-seeded game. Our second-seeded game was Krautfather and MooseCow for the Central Powers versus Dustin and Bandit as the Allied Powers. Then the third-seeded game was the Apple Corps as Central Powers versus the Prussian Grenadiers as the Allies. And lastly, the fourth game, Rust Belt Brigade versus Hoofbite and KooKaMunga. So KooKaMunga showed up for day two, and they were the Allies. And I'm going to look for these scores here. Okay, so the results were the top-seeded game, myself versus CJ. I edged them out. I scored 14 points. That doesn't include the 4-point win bonus. And then CJ had 4 points, so the score was 14-4, but he gets a 2-point loss bonus as well to his cumulative score. So really the game score itself minus the bonuses was 14-4. Next up was Krautfather and MooseCow. They scored 12 points as the Central Powers, defeating Dustin and Bandit, who scored 5. And then our third game, Apple Corps, just looking over here, it's a little cumbersome here. Apple Corps scores a whopping 15, so they get the highest score, the highest game score in the tournament. And that's the highest score I've seen in Kings and Kaisers yet. It's 15 points for Apple Corps. And they also captured Paris, so copycats. Apple Corps gets 15 versus the Prussians, who got 4. So we had a blowout victory there, and then Rust Belt Brigade narrowly wins against Hoofbite and KooKaMunga. They get 6 points as the Central Powers versus Hoofbite and KooKaMunga's 4. So final score 6-4. So yeah, I'm gonna look up the final scores here. I had them written down. Hang on. Oh, there we go. So the final scores, the final cumulative scores for the tournament. 30 points for myself, going 2-0. We had Apple Core at 23 points. MooseCow and Krautfather at 22, just 1 point behind. We had Hammertime, CJ Hammertime at 16. We had Dustin Bandit also at 16. Rust Belt Brigade at 13. Prussian Grenadiers at 11. And Hoofbite and KooKaMunga at 8. So those were our final scores. The way we handled the scores was, yes, it's cumulative score after 2 days, but wins ultimately matter more than losses. So if you have a team that's 1-1 that has the most points out of everybody, but you have another team that's 2-0, right? They didn't even lose a game. The team that's 2-0 will get preference for gold, the medals for gold, silver, bronze over the team that's 1-1. So winning is ultimately the most important thing, and then comes the points. So we had almost 6 out of 8 of our teams were 1-1. One team was 2-0, and one team was 0-2. So the gold would go, unfortunately, to myself. I actually really didn't want to win gold. I wanted to see CJ beat me, because he beat the number 1 seed day 1, and I wanted to see him beat me. I remember telling him before the game, I said, I want to see you win, but I can't let you win. You got to earn it. And that game, despite the score being 14-4, it looks like a blowout. That was a very close game all the way till round 8. It could have gone either way, and the dam just burst open in round 8. I think I had taken the Suez Canal. Wait, no, that was the day 1. I'd have to go back and rewind in my brain, but it was close all the way to round 8, and then everything just sort of burst open and was a cascading effect. The silver goes to Apple Core, getting it by 1 point over MooseCow and Krautfather, who get the bronze. So those are our gold, silver, bronze winners. 4th place would go to CJ Hammertime, Dustin and Bandit, 5th place. There was a tiebreaker at 16 points for those two, but Hammertime had, I forget what the tiebreaker was that gave him the 4th spot. I apologize. I can't remember at the top of my head. But they're essentially a tie, but Hammertime was at 4th, Dustin and Bandit at 5th. 6th was Rust Belt Brigade, 7th, Prussian Grenadiers, and the 8th spot, Hoofbite and KooKaMunga. So that was our tournament. It was a blast, and I hope we can do it again next year. Right now, I put a poll out in the chat to see what people thought of the format overall, because Kings and Kaisers, let's face it, is a longer game. It's longer than BBR just by a little bit. If you know what you're doing and you're familiar with the game, you can definitely finish it in the time clocks that we had for the tournament. So we had 7 hours allotted for each team at each table. So 7 hours for Central Power, 7 hours for the Allies, which BBR typically will give you 6 hours and 6 hours, right? Day 1, my game with Hoofbite, we finished on time. We had an hour left on the clock. Most of the other teams did not, because, again, everybody's really new to this game. I wouldn't say everybody walked in not knowing the rules. Everybody's played games prior, but it's different when it's a tournament setting. And this is the first time we've had this game as a tournament setting. So the clocks, we were not as strict on the clocks with this tournament because largely this is an experiment. We wanted to see how this would go, how quickly teams can finish their games. But after talking to everybody after the first few days, most everybody agreed that the time allotted is definitely doable. I think it's just lack of experience with the game. That's really what it is. I think if next year, my personal opinion is that we would go to 7.5 hours per team. I think that would be good, and I think that's definitely doable. And that's a long day. That is a really long day. It is. There's no way around that. It just is, but I think if players and teams had been mentally prepared for that fact beforehand as well, that could have made things a little bit better. as well as the fact that, hey, this is only 2 days of this. It's not 3 straight days of, that long of a game. So there's that relief there, because, if you go to a BBR tournament, it's 3 12-hour days potentially. If you're in a medal round on day 3, that's 3 12-hour days, and they're intense. Kings and Kaisers, it might be 14 to 15, but for 2 days. And another thing I'm thinking for next year might be cool is if we make this a 3-day event, but the third day you're not playing Kings and Kaisers, it's just a wild card day where everybody can just hang out, chit chat, play, bring other games to play, bring BBR, bring XNLA's anniversary. We could just have that whole day, and that, because we'll have the room, we could just have that whole day to just play whatever. You could have all different kinds of games going on. And that might give everybody a chance to catch up, because, if you go to these tournaments, oftentimes you don't see these people, a whole year till the tournaments, and then you can barely talk to each other because you're all in intense games, and by the end of it, you're just exhausted, So that gives everybody a chance to sort of cool down, chit chat, get back in touch with everybody, and have a nice, easy third day to sort of unwind from the tournament. And I think that'd be kind of cool. So that's kind of the good, bad, and ugly wrapped in a nutshell. Really, I think the good was everybody loved the game. The games overall went pretty smoothly despite the time issues. And we had a good turnout, a lot of good people. And I think that was the successful part. I think the bad, I hesitate to say bad, is kind of a strong term, but I think the timing and the clocks was a little bit of an issue, and it comes from lack of experience mostly. I think next year, 7.5 hours per team, more than enough time. Honestly, my table, I don't want to speak for everybody, but my table, we could have done it with 6.5 hours for each team, but that's not everybody. Some players play a little slower. That's okay. But I think next year we're gonna adhere more strictly to the timers, and 7.5 hours per team is more than reasonable. Also, the people that came this year are going to be more experienced with the game. They're going to know the rules better. They're going to know what to expect, and that'll make things go quicker too. So I think this year was just finding out where our baseline was with this game and for a tournament setting, and then next year will be refining. So yeah, we floated some other ideas around too. Like, what if we made the game 2 games played over 3 days, where you break down in the middle of day 2 and set up for the next one? There's obvious cumbersome issues with that idea. As well as what if we refine the game down further, cut a few rounds off the game, and adjusted the setup to make a tournament version of the game. I kind of don't like that. I kind of like playing the game as it is, how it's meant to be played. And we already cut off the Russian Civil War from the game too, to save time. So I'm really not a fan of that idea. Plus, there's no guarantees either. We would have to make sure that it can be finished within a day too. So I think just allowing a little bit extra time for next year, and then people being more familiar with it, I think that'll be more than enough. And plus, it'll add to the competitive nature of each of the games too, if the timer is more strictly adhered to. Trying to think what else. The venue was great. The service there was great. Really big room. We were only using half of the room, and it was more than enough space for the 4 tables. Way more than enough space. So if we have the full room next year and we have more tables, we could realistically fit 10 tables in there, no problem. So that was awesome. There was a rear entrance too, which made things really convenient. Big parking lot in the back, free coffee, free breakfast. I think I didn't really partake in the breakfast each morning. Room was great. We had a microphone for the room, which was, as you could imagine, with a room full of guys, there was a lot of funniness going on there. And yeah, I'm sure I'll remember some things I wanted to mention in this recap, but that was it. Congratulations to the gold, silver, bronze winners. Thank you everyone who supported this tournament, and a big thanks to John Sr. and John Jr. again for bringing the tables and all the little extras that make a tournament go smoothly. You guys think of all the little things that I forget, and you guys make this possible. Without you guys, this is not possible. And I thank you so much. So And I still owe you railgun files. I'll get to that eventually. So, all right, everybody, take care.